Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is AIA's Florida Women in Architecture webinar, Empowering Voices, Strategies for Addressing Workplace Harassment. Today's panel aims to inform you on what is sexual harassment, what are our legal rights, how do we navigate the policy and procedures to best protect ourselves from backlash, and how do we perceive, process, and address these situations without derailing our mental well-being and our careers. Today's webinar will be presented in 3 parts. We will hear first from Kathleen Scott, Esquire, who will present on the legal perspective, followed by Natalia Castro, who will present on navigating the process from an HR perspective. And we will close with Dr. Betsy Guerra, who will present on coping and evolving. We will have an opportunity for questions, so please submit your inquiries via the chat. Those are public, but I believe that there's a way to ask questions anonymously through the Q&A button. You just have to ensure that you're selecting the recipient for the question, I believe. I want to thank our panelists for taking the time to help inform us on this very important topic today. With us today is Kathleen Scott. Kathleen is managing partner of Scott Law Team, LLC. She received her BA from Stetson University in 1993 and her Juris Doctor from Southwestern University School of Law in 1997. She's board certified in labor and employment law by the Florida Bar. Her firm was established in 2000. She's based in Jupiter, Florida, and specializes in labor and employment law. She represents clients in administrative, state, and federal proceedings. Ms. Scott is highly recognized with an AV rating by Martindale Hubble, super lawyer and rising star designations. Actively involved in legal associations, she serves on the Labor and Employment Law Certification Committee. In 2023, Ms. Scott was invited to speak as an expert on employment law at the Advanced Judicial Studies Conference. Ms. Scott also emphasizes employer training and compliance with labor regulations. She regularly conducts sexual harassment training to create a safe workplace. Kathleen, thank you for being with us. Also with us is Natalia Castro, and she is a dedicated and accomplished professional with over 11 years of experience in the AEC industry, currently serving as Chief Operations Officer and shareholder of Seldes Michelson Architects. Natalia is the firm's second in command. She leads and oversees the company's day-to-day operations to ensure growth and continuous operational improvement. Natalia is a proud U.S. Navy veteran with a strong analytical background, holding a degree in criminal analysis and forensic psychology. Her military experience, coupled with her academic expertise, led her to discover her true passion and talent as a business operator and coach. Natalia's personal mission in life is to help businesses translate their true passion into production and profitability, utilizing her natural leadership and strategic skills to drive success and empower new leaders. And also today with us is Dr. Betsy Guerra. She is a bilingual psychotherapist, international speaker, author of Hurt to Hope, and CEO of the Faith-Based Coaching Academy. Her mission is to ignite faith, unlock greatness, and elevate humanity through her unique psycho-spiritual approach. With her private coaching, workshops, keynotes, and life coach certification offered globally, she empowers individuals and corporations with resilience, elevated mindset, and fulfilling relationships that lead to purpose and joy. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kathleen. And if you want to share your screen, Kathleen.
Great. There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Kathleen Scott. I'm board certified in labor and employment law, and so happy to be here with all of my co-panelists to talk about a really important conversation to have, which is unfortunately something we're still talking about, but I think it is getting better. Let's be hopeful and optimistic, is sexual harassment. So like all good presentations, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to start with the legal definitions of what it means to be sexually harassed. And really, there's something I'd like to highlight, which is that harassment is actually a form of gender discrimination. And so harassment that has the feeling of being motivated because of sex is the type of harassment that we're talking about today. There are other types, but today's focus is on sexual harassment. And the hallmark definition is conduct that is unwelcome. So right off the bat, I want to say consensual conduct is never going to meet the threshold of harassment. What we're talking about is unwelcome conduct that rises to the level of unwelcome activity that's severe or pervasive. So what does that mean, right? That's legal jargon. In the practical day-to-day workplace, what it means is it could be something verbal, meaning it could be something someone says to you, a bad joke, a sexual come on. It could be something somebody says about anti-women in general, like women shouldn't be promoted to management because they should be home with babies, something like, believe it or not, people still say things like that. So it could be something physical, a physical touching, and it could be something visual, showing pornography or things on social media, having things via text message. So it doesn't have to be graphically sexual in order to rise to the level of sexual harassment. It needs to be unwelcome and based on gender. And so sexual harassment is unwanted. And so it can sometimes be a combination of things. It could be a touch, it could be a comment, it could be something a coworker says. But if it feels unwelcome, and it feels uncomfortable, I always tell my clients, listen to that voice inside, right? If you get that feeling of discomfort, honor that, learn to hear that, and we'll talk about how you can speak up with that. So sexual assault is probably a good example of the type of harassment that would be kind of a one-time event. When we think about harassment, usually it isn't a single event. Usually it's a pattern or a culmination of events or something that happens over the course of many weeks or months. And so it's like a daily almost type of environment. And so harassment is something, obviously it's personally offensive, as a female, but it does go both ways. It could be offensive towards someone because of their male sex too. So the law doesn't put people in a better position because they're female. It puts us in an equal position, and both sexes have the same and equal right under the law to say no if something is severe or pervasively unwelcome or hostile environment. We talk about hostile environment, and it's important because it interferes with someone's ability to perform their job. It interferes with the company's ability to serve its mission or serve its clients. And so sometimes when you see people having a difficult time and they're struggling, we always want to take a close look at that. We want to make sure we understand the why. Is it because on a daily basis their boss is coming to them and making sexual innuendos? Is it because on a daily basis people are telling unwanted jokes or making it so sexualized? Sexual harassment is also about the balance of power. It's often meaning the balance is often not equal between an employee and an employer, right? And so sometimes people are in a situation, employees could be in a situation where they might not feel like they can say no. They might not feel like they have an option other than to laugh at jokes that are offensive or to play along at comments that feel unwelcome and intimidating. And so sexual harassment is very much about the balance of power in the workplace. And so when you're trying to identify, we're going to get to complaints in a moment, when to complain or when not to complain, one thing to take a look at is what is the balance of power. So it's different between coworker versus having an employer who's a supervisor kind of making those comments. And that employer supervisor situation, that's much more serious type of harassment, at least in terms of the law. All harassment is bad, of course. So you live in Florida, a little anecdote. Florida is one of the last states in the nation to pass a Florida Civil Rights Act, any kind of protection against harassment in the workplace. But the law in Florida is called the Florida Civil Rights Act, and it really is very similar to a federal law known as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A little bit of history, that law was signed in, and the only thing that could happen under the federal statute in its original form, all you could get was an injunction, and it really only protected against race. So gender was added later, and some other requirements were added later, including more robust damages. So if you are a victim of harassment and you find your way to bringing a claim, you can actually obtain things like wages if you're terminated, or wages if you've lost a promotional opportunity. Sometimes we see failure to promote claims that are kind of hand in hand with sexual harassment. You can get damages, things like, in addition to wages, pain and suffering. So having to endure an environment. The one big takeaway I hope everyone hears today is that the laws in the state of Florida impose a duty. They impose a duty on the employer to maintain a workplace that's, quote, free from harassment. And that's pretty powerful language. But one of the downsides is that they only apply these laws if you have 15 or more employees. And while I'm not suggesting that it's okay to harass your employees if you have a smaller workplace, I am very much letting you know that the law does not apply the same way in those smaller workplaces. And that's something people are often surprised to know about. And knowledge is power. So if you work in a small place and there's less than 15 employees, there are some potential claims that you could have, but they're a little harder to bring, a little bit more challenging. And I would encourage you to get legal advice on how to do that. In all situations, get legal advice. The federal and state laws also provide you with the ability to collect attorney's fees at the end. So often lawyers who help individuals with these types of claims, they are able to collect their fees at the end of the case, making it therefore affordable for someone to get the legal help they want. The law also protects you against being retaliated against, and retaliation is just a special word for retribution. So if you speak out and speak up and complain about workplace harassment, the company, if they terminate you, they'd be violating your rights, and it's called retaliation. So we talked a little bit about sexual harassment. We hear words hostile work environment. That's a type of sexual harassment claim. It just means that in your workplace, there's repeated offensive things that are happening that are unwelcome. And like I said earlier, rarely is one event going to be enough to reach to the level of harassment. But one event should be enough. And I know we're going to talk about this more later to raise a concern or a complaint. So some examples could be, we talked about unwanted touching, comments, the physical, that stuff is obvious. But some things that happen a little bit more subtle might be phone messages or text messages. So I would encourage anybody that's receiving these type of conducts, be aware of that. It's not okay. Also, save those things, don't delete them. And if you want to protect yourself and not be a victim of harassment and you want to be able to state a claim, don't engage. So don't play along. That's called banter. And under the law, if you do respond or laugh or send a LOL emoji, that's going to make it much more difficult for you to bring a claim. Another type is called quid pro quo. It's a Latin word that means this for that. It's a type of harassment where a person with power over your employment might ask you to perform like a sexual favor or do something for a job benefit. Sally, if you come with me for a drink after work, I can put a good word in for you in that promotion that I know you want. That's illegal, and it's called quid pro quo. So one thing I want to do today is really empower individuals to, if they see something, say something, and not just for yourself, but for your coworkers. I really think this sort of what's called the bystander intervention effect. And the idea here is often we would see, all of us can probably think back when we were younger and maybe someone's being picked on in the playground and we didn't say something or speak up to a bully. And so in the workplace, this is a similar type of idea where if you can notice that your coworkers and your friends in the workplace might be acting like avoiding eye contact with a particular supervisor or manager or coworker, or they might be gesturing like they're uncomfortable or wanting someone to stop. And what we're saying is if our coworkers can be aware of that type of behavior when somebody might be the victim of toxic behavior, to try to identify that. Because as a bystander, you can do a couple of things. And again, we're not asking anyone to do anything that puts them in a place that's unsafe. We're just saying recognize these situations. And if there is a safe way to say, hey, leave that person alone, do that. We don't want you to put yourself in a safety issue. But also you could go to the person and say, I notice that every time Ron walks by you, you look cross-armed or upset, or is everything okay? And so in taking these types of actions, they can be really effective in doing two things. One, stopping the behavior, and two, encouraging that person who's a victim to speak up and say something. So notice, recognize, and don't be afraid to take action. And we're going to talk about the best type of action to take. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-panelists to talk about that.
All right. Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was a great introduction to the law side of things, right? And let me share my screen so I can have some sort of guide. So, right now I am the Chief Operating Officer, Salts Microphone Architects. I also we are just 35 people firm, so I also act as the HR component of our firm. And when Denise asked me to sit on this panel, I wanted to bring more than just the human resource technicality perspective from this, because I believe that, Kathleen already explained to us the law, right? And the law is very important, and it's there to protect us. It's there for us to use. There's a lot of unfortunates that people might not understand as much, and that's why we have great professionals such as Kathleen to help us navigate it. From an HR perspective, and either if you are an employee or if you are an employer, that's kind of the perspective that I wanted to bring here. And that's why I put resources under parenthesis, because I believe resources is there, and especially today in the world of the web, we have such a vast information that whatever you need, you kind of Google, ChatGPT is there. But there is that human component to the workplace and to the employee when situations like this come, that I believe it's very important. So let's get the technicality out of the way, because I think that's easy, which is policy, right? So making sure, if you are an employer, you have your policy clear and well defined in your employee handbook, right? Where there's a clear definition of harassment, where you are putting examples there of what harassment would look like. There is a zero tolerance policy, understanding that you're literally buying into that no matter who is the accuser, or who is the victim or the perpetrator, there's a zero tolerance policy, regardless if that person is a higher up or somebody that is just coming up the ranks. Making sure that that policy has a clear reporting mechanism. Who should that person report to? Is there an alternative? If the policy says you should report to your supervisor, but perhaps it's your supervisor that it's harassing you. So who is that second, third choice that you have there, and it's being reported? Also, one of the things that you could do is anonymous. So you could create like a virtual question box that is anonymous, and that person could have that resource to just simply put it in, hey, such and such, so you don't want to put yourself out there. A clear reporting mechanism is very important to be delineated. Ensuring that there's confidentiality and that that person coming forward feels comfortable in sharing whatever the situation is, right? And as an employer, you have the duty to create that safe environment, and I'm going to talk about that later. But also, how can you do that, and how can you state, at least on a policy side, at least on your handbook, that confidentiality will be respected? Delineate your investigation procedures. Ensuring how the step-by-step will happen, receive the complaint, document the complaint, open up an investigation. The investigation can be internal, or you can bring in outside resources as well. Perhaps at this time also, if you do have a HR lawyer like Kathleen that you could consult with, this would be a good time to investigate. As Kathleen said, non-retaliation is huge. Basically ensuring that that person that is coming forward is not going to be retaliated against. It's not going to be reprimanded in any sort of level. Delineate also your disciplinary actions. If it's this is zero tolerance policy, and then after an investigation, it is found that that certain employee did cause harassment onto another employee, the zero tolerance policy is pretty clear that employee shouldn't be, it's violating a policy, and making sure that you have the determination of how that's going to be conducted in there. In our case, it would be termination. Supporting resources. So we are part of a PEO, an public employment organization, and through the PEO there is employee resources that can reach out as far as counseling, as far as groups, etc. But if you're a small firm, you might not have that. So I would suggest having somebody in that HR role that is able to provide some sort of support and have some resources that person that is sitting in that HR role is also trained, right? And also understands what it takes and has the resources to accommodate that person once that complaint comes in. And that goes in hand with training and awareness, right? Part of you don't know what you don't know. So part of delineating these procedures and delineating examples, perhaps, there are things culturally across, especially in Florida, we have such a vast cultural fabric like throughout, and people come from different culture that might say something and it's different than what we are used to. So making sure that we're providing training and awareness of what is and what is not harassment is very, very important. And then what happens if somebody comes forward to you, right, with a complaint? And there are steps that should be delineated within the policies and the actions that you should take. One is sit and listen, right? And making sure that that person is in a safe environment, that is in a confidential environment, the door is closed, as safe as possible as you can. Make sure you're documenting the complaint and let that person know that is coming forward, the victim know that that is going to be documented and is going to be in a written form. You might even ask that person to fill out a form so they can put in their own words in a documented situation so you can take actions from there. As I mentioned on the previous slide, offer the resources that you might have, like a EEP from a PEO or a group or counseling or anything. Just make that person feel as comfortable as they can. Inform the process. So basically you're going to refer back to your policy, whatever you're stating on that policy, and pretty much tell them how it's going to be conducted, the investigation, what are going to be the next steps, when they should expect an answer back or a resolution. One of the things that I will say on this point is if somebody comes back to you, ask them if they're asking for what kind of resolution they're seeking. Because that's very, very important. Sometimes they don't even know if they're seeking anything back, or I don't want to work with that person. I want that person to be fired. I don't want to put in that position. I don't want to go to that job site, right? So understanding what that victim wants out of that complaint is very important. Also maintaining communication. And then you have to analyze the findings. One, you have to determine, was that harassment or not, right? Just because it's a complaint, it might not necessarily mean it falls under the harassment claim. And that's where I think Kathleen did a great job kind of explaining on how to navigate that. But I also believe that we really need to, you need to take in the facts. And that's why perhaps having a proper policy and procedure kind of delineated can serve you as a guide to kind of go back and check those boxes. And I also believe there are always resources like HR lawyers like Kathleen that you can go back into. And if you have a question, you know, this is the time that you consult with them, and then take the appropriate action once that happens. The other side that I wanted to talk about is the human aspect of human resources. There's a thing called transference that happens in psychology when somebody comes in, when a patient comes into you and you kind of share the feelings, and the feelings is transferred onto the, you know, that feeling of safety, right? It happens with the professional. And I see this phenomenon happening a lot in the workplace. Why? Because we're spending more time at work than we're spending with our families, or we're spending with our friends, or we're spending with anybody else. So psychologically, emotional safety in the workplace is huge. It's something that needs to be talked about more often, and it needs to be talked about on a daily basis. And we are changing eras from different generations onto a more empathetic generation, let's put it that way. And that's where psychological and emotional safety needs to have a great importance. So in order for you to have that compassion, in order for somebody to come forward to you on a part of a complaint, you have to have that open door policy. right? And a lot of the companies don't have that. Some companies feel the threat of retaliation. Oh, I can't complain that because that's the nature of my job, and then I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to be able to. So having the emotional safety net, understanding that yes, it's still a professional relationship, but how can you make that employee comfortable to come to you in any sort of situation, right? It's very important. And when, especially us, there are in leadership positions, and if you're a small firm or if you're a big firm, or if you're in this, we kind of tend to want to solve the situation. And in situations like this, we just need to sit back and listen, because the perspective of that person and what made that person come to you and complain it's what matters. And either at the end of the process you find out it's not really harassment, but what is bothering that person, and how can you make that person's position in that environment feel better, that she doesn't feel that way. And I believe Betsy is going to talk a little bit more about that, but I'll leave that to her. But also building that trust and respect relationship with your employee, with your employer, is very important. And also ensuring that you have confidentiality. If that employee comes into you, it stays with you. You conduct the investigation. Perhaps you talk to a lawyer. Perhaps you talk to a higher up, but that stays with you. So I want to just to share on a practicality a couple of cases that had happened recently, unfortunately, at my firm, and how we conducted it, and what was the outcome. At a networking event, we had one of the employees. It was an out of town conference, and as you are at a networking event out of town, trying to get business and meet people and exchange and get to know. One of the exchanges happened that it was a prospective client. This employee was exchanging with them. They go back onto everybody. There was a group of people. They all go into an elevator. And as they're going up, before they reach the certain floor, a person attacked this employee in the elevator. The point that I want to bring to the story is that this incident happened in August. She only reported in December. And towards the end of November or December, it took a while for her report. And it was very unfortunate. It's not that we don't have an open door policy. We do have an open door policy. But in the back of her mind, she was questioning herself what she did wrong. It was, she didn't want to jeopardize the relationship with the client. So that was kind of a situation. It's kind of, it's not okay. And she was working personally on that end. But it took a while. And as the HR person in the company, and as the second in command of the company, I questioned myself. Well, what can I do better that she feels comfortable in situations like this, especially because it's a work event. She comes forward on something like this to me. So she was assaulted, literally physically assaulted. We asked her, if she wanted us to report to the police, if you want to take any actions. And from her standpoint, she did not want to report it. And at that point, we completely respected her and didn't do anything beyond give her the resources of anything that we needed. A second case that happened was an employee visited a job site, and the person responsible, the project manager responsible for the job site, kind of exchanged flirtatious comments with her, and she's been nice because it's the job site. As we know, like the construction administration, we go to the site, we figure out what is happening. And that person took her card and kept messaging her. When am I going to see you again? How are you? I think you're beautiful. And she did not engage, but then the person was calling the office and the person was sending pictures of himself. So again, in that case, we went through the investigative procedure. Since it involved another company that we do business with, we activated their HR. They conducted an investigation on their end. Our employee did not want to take any actions, but he wanted to make it aware and make their HR aware. And I believe they ended up letting that person go. So those are the two cases that happened with us, unfortunately, and it is still an active topic. It's not talked about it enough. So I want to thank Denise for bringing that up. But with that, I want to pass it over to Betsy to talk about how we can further cope when this happens.
Good afternoon. So we've listened to Kathleen and we've listened to Natalia. Thank you, ladies, for being so helpful and defining. And I invite all of you, I was going to say badasses, beautiful women, but I think you're badasses if you're here, to take a deep breath with me, because now we're going to talk about you and what you can do and what you have to do with this. So we'll take a moment. We're going to inhale through our nose. And we're going to exhale through our mouth. And with the next inhale, we're going to inhale power. And we're going to let go of any vulnerabilities or sense of inadequacy that we may feel. We're going to do that one more time. Inhale power. Exhale inadequacies, insecurities, fears. Now we continue to breathe slowly and naturally. And we get to, from a place of empowerment, because you breathed in the power, we're going to listen to what I have to share. Because I am not working with victims. I'm working with victors. That's why you're here. That's why you're part of this particular association, because you're amazing and badasses and go-getters and capable and strong and powerful. So from that place of empowerment, we're going to listen and discern and hopefully reflect on how this applies to each and every one of us. So the first thing I want to share is that we don't have control over other people. I wish we did. A lot of people would be very different. We have control over ourselves, and we don't realize how much power that is. We think like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough power. Power is limited because I can't control the external situations or the people around me. But you have abundant, infinite power by just having the ability to control yourself. And what does that mean? You have power over what you think, not what you think, because thoughts are going to pop up in our minds and they may be uninvited, but we have the ability and the power to choose what thought we engage with and what thought we believe. Thoughts are sentences. We don't have to believe all the sentences that pop up in our minds. So from that place of power, of understanding that we can control the thoughts we engage with, we can control the feelings we experience, because the feelings are informed by the interpretation and the belief in those thoughts, and we can control our actions. We can decide and choose how we're going to move forward. From that place of empowerment, we understand that we are the victors. No matter what other people do around us, we have power over that. And Kathleen and Natalia have shared a little bit of how you can act. What are some of the things that you can do to take on that power, to reclaim that power? And I'll share a little more about the internal power that you have of like, how do I interpret this? How do I think about it? What do I believe in regards to this? And how do I respond to it? So number one, I would invite you to focus on being first. Many times we're too worried about what to do and like how to act and how to prevent and how to judge and how to be super pissed off at the people who are being very inappropriate. But instead, we get to come back to what we can control, which is everything within us, and focus on being. What you focus on, you create more of. So if you're too worried about is this going to happen to me? Am I too vulnerable? Is this person like this, this authority figure in my job? Like, is he intimidating? Like, if you're focusing on the fear, if you're focusing on the things that are outside of you, number one, you don't have control over them. And number two, you may create more of that, because we have energy within, and we ooze what we fear, and we, in some way, we attract it. So one of the greatest powers you have is focus. What you focus on, you create more of. So my invitation is to focus on being. And what does that mean? Be the kind of person who ends sexual harassment immediately, or is not even exposed to that possibility. Easier said than done, because there's some people out there that have some really bad habits and come with those habits to anyone, and they don't really care who you are. So the idea of focusing on being is that in the measure that you become the kind of person that others dare not say or do something to that's disrespectful, you're going to not attract that more times than not. There will be moments in which someone has those bad habits and comes to you, and then you have the opportunity to end it immediately. And, that may look like someone says something like, oh, you're looking really, really good today. Like, oh, you smell so delicious. Like, your husband must be a happy man. Like, let's say they're saying whatever it is that you feel uncomfortable with. You could be like something that Denise was saying in our meeting earlier, like, do you talk like that to your leadership peers, or like, do you talk to everybody like that? Kind of like, is there a difference with how you're talking to me? Do you not realize that I don't welcome those comments? Or if I give you an example of one of my clients, she was exposed to exposure of the person's intimate parts. And he was like there showing his parts, and she's like, does that come in men's size? She stay like that. So like her response, because she's a confident woman who believes that's not acceptable in her life, she had a response that was ready to come out of her, and let the person in front of her, even in it was like, just like the assault that Natalia was talking about, like, there are certain experiences of sexual harassment that are unquestionable, right? Like, in others, we get to discern a little bit, but there's some that are like straight up, like, yeah, no, that's textbook. And in even those situations, there's an opportunity for you to convey the message that, hey, that's not okay. And you're doing that not just for yourself, to protect yourself, but also for those who are going to come after you. Because these people who come with not just bad habits, sometimes it's mental disorders. Like, there are people who expose themselves like this man, and I have had clients like that, and it's anxiety. Like, they have this deep sense of anxiety that is released and relieved by exposing themselves and exposing their parts. So it's not necessarily that they're like evil people. They also may have mental illness that we don't have to welcome. We don't. Right? So my invitation is not just to think about the legal, powerful, important aspect, or the human resources, employment, relationship aspect, but also about how are you going to create a change in the world that helps other women or men not have to be exposed to these inappropriate behaviors that may be even traumatic. They may be very traumatic in life. So focus on being. What about me? Like, what are some insecurities I have, vulnerabilities, traumas, past experiences, heartbreaks? What are some of those experiences I've had in my life that remain unprocessed, that I haven't really like taken care of, that may be oozing and maybe radiating outside of me, that's attracting the possibility, or is making me vulnerable to be one of the victims of these people with bad habits? Or if it's a person that just doesn't really care about who you be or who you are, then how can you be a trailblazer? How can you support the women that are coming after you, who are going to be exposed to that person, by ending it immediately and setting some boundaries, speaking up, communicating, just as Kathleen and Natalia have shared previously. The second thing I want to share is choose you over your job. sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, but if I say this or if I do this, then I may get fired. And many times we, especially as professional go-getter badass women, we identify with our careers as if it were who we are. But that is just a part of us. Our careers are a part of us. We are so much more. We're moms, we're career women, we are people of service, we are love, we're so many, there's so many parts of us that are within us. It's like I always tell my students in the coaching academy that we are like elephants. And there's a story of blind men who were asked to feel an elephant and describe the elephant. So the one that was in the tail was like, oh, an elephant is like a thin, long, thing that feels like a little rough. And then the person in the body was like, oh, well, an elephant is like a big surface that's like a little rough. And then the one in the trunk was like, oh, an elephant is this like big round tube that goes from like thicker to thinner, and it's also rough and has some hairs. And the person in the legs was like, oh, the elephant is like a tree trunk, it's strong and sturdy. An elephant is all of those things. Those are parts of the elephant, but neither one describe the elephant as a whole. And we are also in the bad habit of identifying with something, a part of our lives, a role in our lives that we think is who we are. So in the awareness that we are so much more than the legs and the tail and the trunk and the body, we get to understand that our jobs, our careers are a part of us, oftentimes a very important part of us, but it's not who we are. So in the measure that we choose ourselves over our jobs, we can gain the confidence and the courage to speak up and set boundaries with these people who have those bad habits and are just not welcomed in our life. So choose you. In the measure that you focus on being, you're also choosing you, because you're looking inward and seeing, what do I have to do with the possibility of being exposed? How can I create a life? And I think that we're the creators and producers of our life movie. How can we create characters in our movie that serve us and support us and remove those that don't? In which ways am I creating scenes and challenges and struggles in my movie that are contributing to being vulnerable to the experiences such as sexual harassment? So let's use this not just to learn about the external like definition of what it means and how we can go about it, but like let's get curious as to, what about me? Like, do people see me as weak or vulnerable? Or like, are they confusing my introversion with, yes, you can do anything with me, or with a weakness? And then reclaim your power. Reclaim your power by focusing on being the kind of person who is not exposed to this or ends it immediately, because we really don't have control over external situations. The third thing I want to share is discernment. Take time to discern. When I talk about discernment, what I mean is this really sexual harassment? Like this comment that this person made, is it sexual harassment or is it a compliment? Is it malintended? Is it disrespectful? Is it a form of abuse? Or is it something that is unwelcome because I'm not familiar with receiving compliments and praise? And this is really important. Sometimes, like if you think about the definition of sexual harassment, it's unwelcomed behavior that has to do with gender and whatnot. But unwelcomed is very biased, very subjective. Like what's unwelcome for me may not be unwelcome for you. You may receive it happily. So let's be part of the solution to this problem by discerning, is this unwelcome because this person was legit, straight up inappropriate or disrespectful, or like he crossed that boundary? Or is this unwelcomed because I just don't know how to receive it and it may be well intended? It's tricky sometimes, right? Like I am one to always be giving compliments. I have a lot of love and joy an admiration for people in my heart. I love people, love them hard. So I'm constantly at this point unconsciously, because I've made it such a habit, it's so automated in my life. I'm constantly looking for what's right with people. I'm looking for what's beautiful and within them. And it's scary to think that I may be judged as someone who's harassing someone when I, from the goodness of my heart, I'm complimenting that person. The other day I went to a hotel, and I'm doing the check-in, and the person helping me in the check-in has the most beautiful eyes. It's a man. And I, I was doing something with the reservation or looking at my phone or the papers or something. And when I look up and I see his eyes, I go like, you have the most beautiful eyes. My goodness. Of course, it was the tone with which I said it, the fact that my husband was standing next to me, my kids too, right? Like the environment, like it all plays together to support that I am not trying to disrespect that person, but rather compliment him. But I think if the opposite were true, it's a little trickier, because with the whole Me Too movement, which is great for awareness, but sometimes the awareness like just takes a different turn, and we invite in this case, right, like men to not be nice and kind and consider like saying things that are beautiful to the people around them, right? Like, because I know a lot of men who are terrified of saying something nice because they're scared that it will be unwelcomed or misinterpreted or whatnot. Like my husband the other day was telling me that someone in his job was wearing like nice shoes, and he told her only because he knows her well enough to, and she knows his family and me, his wife included, to know that like she'll receive it. But I was like, how sad that my husband has to think about saying like your shoes are really nice to someone, right? Like he's not saying like you have a nice ass. That would be something different. But it's, I don't know, like I just want to make sure that yes, we learn about all these things, that we're aware, that we stand up for ourselves, that we take action, and that we also contribute to the solution to the problem, which starts from within in creating these possibilities for the people who follow, and disarming those who have the bad habits of just saying whatever they want whenever they feel like it. This sermon is not what Natalia's case examples did. She took her 4 months to think, what did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? What did I do wrong? That's not what I'm asking about when it comes to discernment. Like this person attacked her, physically attacked her. That's like, she doesn't have to figure out and interpret, like, was this meant as a compliment? Was this meant as a praise? Like, is this harassment? Right? Like, she wasn't discerning. She wasn't necessarily thinking of focusing on being like, oh, like, what about me could have prevented that? How could I have been more empowered? In which ways did I lead him on to believe that it was okay for him to do that to him? She wasn't discerning. She was in fear. And when there's fear, then you're not discerning, because discernment comes from a place of empowerment, and fear is a vulnerability, right? So that's why doing the work to process those fears. So like, what could she have done in the process of discerning before speaking up? Maybe processing this experience with a professional, a coach, a therapist. Like, how could she have processed it enough to then bring it forth and speak up for herself and the people who follow? Because we have a responsibility with ourselves, but we also have a responsibility with the people around us, whether we know them or not. We don't live in an island. We're people of society, of community, and we get to do the work to protect also the people around us by protecting ourselves. We're one with them. Create boundaries. What does it mean to create boundaries? Like, people think that boundaries are like, like you there, me here, like, and they're mean, and people take it personally and they feel bad when you set boundaries. But there's so many beautiful, loving ways of creating boundaries. and the way we carry ourselves, the way we respond, the way we engage, right? Like if someone is starting to be disrespectful and we engage with it because he's the boss and we're choosing our job over ourselves, we may be leading them on, and we may be allowing them to continue harming us. In which ways can we create boundaries and be like, I don't appreciate you saying that? Or like sometimes it could be more subtle. Like I've had clients, and in my case, I'm responsible for the well-being of my clients and that I'm there in the best interest of my clients. So there's been clients who I notice like have something for me, or they think they have something for me, right? Like psychologically speaking, I recognize that like men, like people sexualize what feels good, and they have someone who's listening, who's validating, who's there for them, right? So they may sexualize what I represent and think that they have something, like feel something towards me. So I have that part to help me discern and see what I can support them with. But then there's also the part of like, I'm not gonna allow for them, just because I'm here at their service, I'm not gonna allow for them to be treating me like a piece of meat. It's not okay with me. So when I see that they're saying or doing things that cross the boundary that I am okay with, I'll maybe more subtly at the beginning, I'll be like, I know. And that's why my husband, and I'll talk about my husband like crazy. I'm obsessed with my husband. So it's super easy to like convey how they don't stand a chance. And let's come back to center, buddy. We're talking about you and how we can help you process this thing. Like, so I'll do it subtly at the beginning by giving examples or, things that resonate with what we're talking about. And if at any given point that subtle approach is not working, I am happy to be like, I've noticed you've been saying these things and that is really inappropriate. Have you ever thought about that? And, and I can even use it as part of therapy. It could be like, you've been talking about how these relationships are struggling, but I am starting to feel the same. And I wonder if this is what they're feeling too. So there's always a way of, whether it's subtly without having, like kind of like, let me get you, did you get the point? Like, say it subtly, or straight up directly, like, hey, that's not okay. I don't appreciate you saying that. And I ask that this is the first and last that you say something like that. That's not cool with me.
Betsy,
Right? Like just, yes.
I think we have some
we're done.
questions.
Yes. That's it. So be part of the solution and let's create an environment ourselves that we are able to thrive in and feel like the victors that we are.
awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, all three of you, for your words of wisdom. I know that we've had a few questions coming in. I'm gonna let Becky kind of sort through them and present them to the panel. Some were comments, some were questions. Maybe we can.
Sure, yeah, we're trying to get through as many as possible here. The first one, what happens when a woman HR person does not address issues brought up?
Happy to jump in on that, or go ahead, Natalia.
No, I was going to refer to you.
So I'm glad someone asked this question, because one thing I want people to know in terms of being empowered is there's a very short time period to act to protect your rights. If you feel like you're being harassed and you've gone through a complaint procedure to HR and they haven't addressed the concerns, you should probably reach out and obtain legal counsel, or file what's called a charge of discrimination with the administrative agencies. They're called the EEOC and the Florida Commission. What you need to remember is not the acronym and all the alphabet soup, but you have a very short time period to do that. So don't delay. If you wait longer than 300 days, and remember, you're gonna have to prepare it and get to a lawyer, give them time to prepare it. You really need to act immediately within months of feeling that the action isn't being redressed.
I would also say, put it in writing, right? Like if you come to that person and that person really didn't address your needs, put it in writing. The responsibility falls back on you as well, to make sure that that's being followed through. And if that HR person, I would say on a practical level, if that HR person didn't answer, take it up the ranks. Hey, I made this complaint to HR. HR didn't address it. Go to whoever is up next, or go to the president of the company.
I think it's an excellent point. Definitely put it in writing, but also not all complaints are the same. So if you go to HR and you say, I didn't like the joke told at our morning huddle, That's not the same as saying the joke told at the morning huddle was extremely appropriate. It commented on a woman's appearance. It felt harassing on the basis of sex. I'm requesting that you look into it. And another comment about not all complaints are equal is you can do it in a positive way. I love Betsy's point about not attributing a negative motivation. Sometimes people just don't understand what they're saying is offensive. So when you say the words, you can also say, I really appreciate you looking into this. I think it's very important to be positive. If for no other reason that may end up as exhibit number 1 in your lawsuit many months ago, if it goes that way.
All right, another question. Are visual looks legally considered sexual harassment, such as a person looking down someone's shirt, staring at someone's body parts, etc.?
For sure. I mean, that's part of the visual thing. I would maybe put that in the category of a microaggression. If it's just a look, looking at the body part, I would say is more serious, but yes, I would think that's something that should be reported.
All right, another question, thank you. When there is an investigated and verified case of sexual harassment, intimidation, or inappropriate behavior from a staff member that results in the staff member being let go from the company, what are the company's legal and ethical obligations or restrictions in discussing the reasoning for that person being let go with the victims or the full company staff?
It's a great question. As the legal advice I always give my clients is you can't discuss the reasons for someone else's termination, even though it's much to the dismay of the victim. They want to know what happened, they want to know the reasons, but you have to tread that line. So typically a good company that's enforcing their policies, I'd be curious what Natalia's view on this is to tell the person who complained, look, we've dealt with it out of privacy for the person. We can't discuss the details of how we've dealt with it, but if anything happens again, please continue to report. If the person's terminated, you can't really get into the details as to the how, what, why, and when.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't certainly communicate it, but leave it as the person left the company, but also perhaps bring in the training component of the harassment. Maybe that's a good timing to bring in that training component without really associating to that person.
Right, thank you. Kathleen, this one's for you. Something that Natalia touched on. Do you find that culture and race play a significant part in who and what is reported and also what the outcome is? America can be very litigious, other cultures not so much, which would also play a part on what is reported or not. Cultures that say, oh, whatever, because he or she didn't mean it that way, etc.
I think that's very true. Sometimes the best cases that I've litigated have been because other people complained about what they witnessed, not necessarily the victim complaining for exactly those reasons, cultural reasons. And so for that, what I would remind everybody, if you're a member of management, if you have supervisory obligations, you have an affirmative duty to report sexual harassment. It's not optional. That is part of the company can only act through its employees and supervisors. So if you're a supervisor or managerial capacity, if you see something, you must report it. Not reporting it is usually a basis for terminating. So I think that is trying to get at the problem kind of another way, right? So people who might feel kind of laid back. Now, if they're feeling laid back because it's not unwelcome, then it might not be harassment, but I would err on the side of reporting it for sure.
Yeah, and I would add to that and make that very clear in your handbook. So sometimes, part of being a manager is your duty to report whatever you see, right? So make sure that's clearly defined in your handbook and it's clearly defined in your job description too, and make sure people do understand that. And again, the training component is huge.
Yeah. Your policy is only as good as people understand it, right?
Exactly.
Right. You gotta train, practice. And I think if any employers are out there listening or supervisors are listening, I would add to that the first word out of your mouth when someone brings a complaint to you should be thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for bringing this concern to my attention, not shock and awe about or upset about why didn't I hear about it sooner? Why, how can you possibly expect me to believe that? Keep your opinion to yourself, listen, thank, document the details of the complaint.
All right, if there are any other questions, please type them in. We did have a few other, but say there are some specific cases that perhaps I will be able to give you guys afterwards, and maybe you can specifically answer them. They are. So with that, Denise, we are at 12:59. If there's any other closing remarks.
Becky, I did notice that somebody asked a question about the number of employees, and I did want to just quickly mention that
Thank you.
those two statutes I mentioned, the federal law and the state civil rights act, do require 15 or more employees. There is a local ordinance that does require fewer employees. So if you've heard today, oh, that my company doesn't have 15 or more employees, maybe you work for a small architect firm, there are other avenues of relief out there for you. So don't just assume that, you know, there's no rights. There are other things. We can be creative. We've had to be creative for a number of years, so we can be creative.
And there was the question that brought that on, thank you, Kathleen, was somebody asked how many architecture firms in Florida have more than 15 versus less than 15. I don't have those statistics right in front of me, but I do know the majority of our firms in Florida are small firms and would probably fall underneath this, but I do not have I didn't want to give anybody any inaccurate numbers, so I did not quote any numbers there, so thank you.
And independent contractors might count for that number. So I know a lot of people might be classified as contractors. So listen, if you work for any firm and you feel like you're being harassed, get some legal help. Don't just assume your company's too small.
Thank you, everybody. I would like to thank again our panelists. Ladies, I want to do one last go around with you. If you would please share with our guests where they can reach you if they need your help. Kathleen, do you mind sharing the best way to reach you?
Absolutely. So I work at a firm with 8 other fantastic lawyers. We have an intake process that's kind of like urgent care for employees. So you can reach us online through scottlawteam.com. You can actually schedule an appointment online, or you can call our office. Our number is also available online at scottlawteam.com. And we're also known as Florida Labor Lawyer. So those are pretty easy to remember, but happy to help. And thank you so much for having me, Denise, Becky, and my co-panelists, Becky and Natalia. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Betsy.
so much. And Dr. Betsy, how can folks reach you if they want to further a conversation with you? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Betterwithbetsy.com. Better with Betsy on social media, including LinkedIn, betterwithbetsy.com, the website, Better with Betsy everything.
Awesome. Thank you. And Natalia, I know your services aren't out there for the public.
Yes, but if anybody wants to, some of the resources that I mentioned, I know that there was a question there, I'll be happy to share. Organizations like the AIA, it's great because of exchange of what we learn on our practices and we can share with others. So I'll be more than happy to for any questions or any bounce of ideas. So saltzmichelson.com and Castro@saltzmichelson.com. That's my email. Thank you so much, Denise, for the invitation, Becky for the assistant, Betsy and Kathleen for the sharing. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and stay tuned for our next Women in Architecture session. We have our wonderful Lourdes Solera with us. I don't know if Lourdes, you want to do a shameless plug for our next webinar?
Yes, our next website, thank you. Our next webinar is, look at my calendar, June 26th. And we're still working the details as to who we have, but look in your emails, and see you at lunchtime on June 26th.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies.